So, all of that out of the way, it's a real pleasure to welcome and introduce you all to Christine Seddon. Christine is a lifelong Blackpool supporter and was chair of the Blackpool Supporters Trust during the Oyston years. She was part of the trust that helped lead a 4-year boycott of the club and return Blackpool to its community. Now she sits on the committee of Blackpool's Trust, the FSA National Council, and has been involved in shaping the future fan representation at national level from the beginning of discussions on the incoming football regulator. I first met Christine through the FSA at a roundtable discussion on the regulator with Lisa and Andy, and more recently we've had a catch up to discuss the difficulties going on at our club, and it felt like the right time to kind of bring that conversation into this space. Christine is one of the people in the country who's been where we are, watching your club slide, wondering what difference you can make, and wrestling with the divisions that have opened up. So tonight's a chance to hear her story, ask questions, and think about what might help us stay strong and together, maybe get some ideas. So, Christine, thank you again for joining us. I think it's probably a good place to start with your story. So, can you take us back to the crisis at Blackpool, kind of where did it begin? How did the boycotting start? And kind of how did that feel on the ground?
Okay, well, hello everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me. What we went through at Blackpool has made a lasting impression on me, and that's why I'm still involved in football now and the football governance side of things. So I'm not a paid person. I am a volunteer, and I do all this stuff out of conviction because I've seen too much, and it breaks my heart to see yet another football club going through similar things to what we went through. I am a third generation Blackpool fan, and there's now actually 5 generations in my family. So we are, cutters and we bleed tangerine. I totally understand about connections to your football club. So our story at Blackpool, it's an incredibly long story, so I will try and make it as brief as possible. Such an awful lot went on. But basically, back in 1988, when Blackpool was on the point of dropping out of the leagues and going out of business, Owen Oyston, a local businessman, stepped in and bought the club for £1. That is the first and last positive thing that I have to say about our past owner, although I will try not to mention him too much. So he took over the club, and it was obvious from the word go that his purchase of the club was not really out of the goodness of his heart or the love of the football club, but was basically for his own benefit and his family's benefit. We bumped along mainly in the lower divisions for a long time, in a dilapidated old stadium with lots and lots of promises on a regular basis, but very few of them were actually delivered. As Bethany has already alluded to, in 1996, he was convicted of raping a 16-year-old girl and was sent to prison. At that point, you would hope that he would be done with football and wouldn't be allowed anywhere near a football club. But unfortunately, that was not the case. So although he was not allowed to officially continue running Blackpool Football Club, he couldn't be forced to sell the club, so he put his wife in instead as the chairman. Of course, none of us can see any possible problem there, can we? Then she was got quite a bit of abuse, to be fair, from the fans. Things were not going well, and she stood down. And then their son, Carl Oyston, an extremely charmless, unpleasant individual, took over at the club. Owen was allowed out of prison after just 3 years, and of course has been a figure around the football club and has been welcomed into boardrooms up and down the country ever since. So Blackpool fans were not happy with the way the club was run, but I think, like most fans, we did a bit of protesting here and there a lot over the years, but it never really amounted to very much. However, in the 2000s, a Latvian businessman appeared on the scene, and he became a minority shareholder. He bought 20% shares in the football club. Things changed for the better when he came in, because he did actually invest in the club, in the players, in the infrastructure, and we started to progress and improve. Eventually, as you may or may not remember, in 2010, we won the footballing lottery and we got to the Premier League through the Championship playoffs, which was a staggering achievement. And Blackpool fans we just could not believe. We were pinching ourselves, as you can imagine. None of us expected us to remain in the Premier League. We have to be realistic, size of the club, etc., funds available. But the monies that came into the club at that point were unprecedented. I think it was about £90 million in 2010 for winning the Premier League, getting into the Premier League. And then, of course, once you're relegated, there's parachute payments as well. All of that money was earned by the football team for the football club. But although, we knew all along that the Oystons were not really benevolent towards the club, and it was all set up for them, but we couldn't believe that even they would waste such an opportunity. But in actual fact, what happened was that they basically trousered the money and left the club to decline. It's much more complicated than I'm telling you, but to be honest, we'd be here all night if I went into all the ins and outs. So we did get relegated at the end of that season, and then the decline just began. We lost Ian Holloway as a manager. The stadium was still crumbling. Players left. We went through something like, I think it was about 7 managers in 4 years. It was an absolute disaster. And then the accounts started to come out and we started to see what the Oystons were doing with what in effect, or what we felt was our money. And Owen Oyston paid himself an £11 million dividend, which is the largest dividend anyone has ever in football paid themselves. And while the club was in dire straits, he was also removing literally millions of pounds around into his other businesses. He had a bison farm near Lancaster, can you believe it? We just could not believe what we were seeing and what we were hearing. And yet, really, knowing what they were like, were we surprised? No. Should we have acted on them earlier? Yes, we absolutely should. But I think it was that getting to the Premier League that the greed took over, and they couldn't hide what they were doing any longer. So as fans, what do you do? What do you do when it's your team and it's your club that's falling apart? As time went on, it became so very obvious that not only were they utilising all this money that had come from our stay in the Premier League, but obviously the money that we were giving them through season tickets, merchandise and all of that was basically going the same way. The club was barely functioning. It was just ticking over. So there comes a point where, as a supporter, you have to start looking at the situation and thinking, well, how do we stop this? So, of course, your first step, apart from protesting in the ways that you're doing, that we've done, that many other clubs have done, with banners and marches and all this sort of thing, you also, of course, we went to the football authorities and were met with the fact that, in effect, they weren't breaking any rules. They weren't breaking any football authority rules. They weren't even breaking the law in terms of removing monies from the club, because he owned the football club. It was just one of many businesses. So he was actually entitled to move this money around. It was a horrific situation. And I remember very clearly feeling so appalled at the injustice of it all and thinking, how can this be? How can it be that as supporters, we are the lifeblood of a club? We are surely the most important people connected to the club, and yet we have no rights whatsoever. We literally have nowhere to turn. Now, at this point, the idea of boycotting began. Not a penny more was born, and it meant exactly what it says. Do not give them another single penny. But it's not just the denying them the funds, because obviously for us, we were looking at trying to starve them out, because they're literally at that stage, there was nothing else that we could do. But it was also about dealing with the normality of a football club, because if a club is ticking over, even if it's not doing very well, and your fans are turning up, and the ground has got people in it, and the games take place, and the players do eventually get played. I know yours haven't. Ours did. it gives it a semblance of normality, and the world just rolls on and you are just basically ignored. So we realized that it wasn't just about withholding our money, it was about withholding our presence as well. Because every time we set foot in that stadium, we were basically enabling them, we were empowering them to continue doing what they'd been doing all along, but which we had now found out, we had indisputable proof that their intent for our football club was not good. They were destroying it from the inside, basically, and feathering their own nests. And they did not give that much about what the club was going through, what the fans were going through, what it was doing indeed to the local community. So that's how Not a Penny More was born. Of course, not everybody got involved right at the start. It is one of those things that I think you have to build up to, maybe. In addition to that, the club had actually done a special offer on season tickets in the 2014-15 season that you could buy two seasons worth of tickets at a very special price. So a lot of people had gone for that in the hope that things would improve, but then things did not improve. So fans were making comments publicly about what was going on, and the chair of our trust at the time, who was Tim Fielding, because we'd only just begun the trust, he is actually a solicitor, he made the comment that they were asset stripping the club. They were asset stripping the club, and that has since been proved. But at that time, we didn't have the evidence. So they decided that they were going to sue him for defamation of character. I'm not sure how you defame characters like theirs, how it could be any worse than what everybody already knows, but that's what they did. And of course, because we didn't have the evidence, he ended up having to issue a grovelling apology that had been issued by the club. It was nauseating, and had to pay them £20,000 to make them not take him to court. And then it happened to somebody else and to somebody else, until in the end there was probably about 19 people being sued by the owners of our club. That, I think, was the absolute catalyst for most people. There's a limit to what anybody can take, and when that sort of thing is going on, it was just too much. So their own actions, in effect, increased the numbers of people who were boycotting, until by sort of 2016, 2017, it was virtually everybody. There was, regardless of the nonsense numbers that they used to put out on match days, it ended up there was under 1,000 people going in the stadium. And it was a very, very tough and difficult decision for anybody to have to make. But we literally had run out of options. And for me, and I know everybody I speak to says the same, I couldn't look myself in the mirror anymore if I'd continued to empower them to do what they were doing to us. So that's how it began, very, very painfully, but it gathered momentum, and it started to be extremely, extremely successful, because they believed that we as football fans were all stupid. We're all a bit thick. We just turn up and they can lead us by the nose. And we proved that that was absolutely not the case, that they were not untouchable, and that we as fans, actually, the power does actually lie with us if we are willing and courageous enough to seize that power and to use it. But of course, that depends very much on unity. And I know that we'll talk about that a bit further on, about how you unite people. But I will have to say to you that when you've got like a common enemy, which is what they were, they felt like the enemy. They felt like people who had literally, aliens who had occupied our football club, and we needed to get them out. And there was no other way to do it than by literally starving them out. Now, just to add on to that, that was the start of it. It was certainly not the finish of it. I mentioned the minority shareholder. Now, he also had been completely sidelined by them. So they were removing all this money. They just weren't communicating with him. He had an actual investment, but he was getting nothing out of it. He wasn't even getting reports or financial reports or anything. So a group of from BST went over to Latvia and met with him. And the result of that was that he decided to take a civil action against them. Now, he could do that because he had a 20% share. This was a business, so it was an action between two business people. But in the middle of that action was a community football club that was getting absolutely battered. And we were able to leapfrog, shall we say, onto that action. The action itself, and some people say that that was what got rid of Owen Oyston. It is not what got rid of him. It certainly helped because he went on to win nearly £32 million against the Oystons when it was proven in court what had gone on. What was marvellous for us was that his legal team, who were absolutely tip top, unearthed so much evidence that we were able to make use of. Frustratingly, the football authorities still would not act, even though they then ended up with a 163-page document that gave them all the evidence really they needed of what a poor, bad owner he was. But they still wouldn't. But it was still useful for us to use. Blackpool fans were in every single court action that went on over a period of almost 2 years. In fact, we used to laugh and say we'd been into more court cases than we'd been to football matches. We became like little experts. We obviously hoped that a £32 million judgment would be enough, coupled with the financial tsunami that the boycotting had caused, to get him out. But he was a very, very wealthy man. And he had other businesses and land and property that he could sell. And it was one of the most awful periods for us because it felt like we really were stuck. He was determined, I think, to try and sell anything else other than the football club to pay off this debt. Thankfully, we had a fantastic judge. Turns out he was an Arsenal fan. We'll forgive him for that because he understood football. And the action that the Blackpool fans had done over all this year, all over the years, was actually part of the court actions. We saw bundles and bundles of evidence of newspapers and reports that had covered what we had done all those years. And so in the February of 2019, because Owen had only at that point, I think, paid about 10 million off this £32 million debt, the judge intervened and he placed a receiver over the football assets only. Now, the only reason he did that was because of what we did. He understood that the situation was so serious that this football club was going to die. It was a community asset that was literally going to die if those owners were not removed. And he had the power to remove them, and he did. But it was made very clear in court, and it's very important you understand this because some people still say it was Valeria Bellacon's action. It was not. It was very useful and it was wonderful that he did that. But it was the action, the boycott for year after year, the behaviour of the Blackpool fans that convinced the judge that this was necessary, and therefore he put the receiver in place, and they were out. They were got rid of, and I cannot begin to tell you what what that meant to us. So that is a very, very potted history of where we started, what we did, why we had to do it, and how it ended up. So I'm happy if anybody has any questions at this point before we move on, please do ask away. I'll have a quick drink of my tea if that's all right.
Perfect. Feel free to put your hand up or pop it in the chat. Paul?
Yeah, hi Christine. I'm Paul Taylor from the Sheffield Wednesday Supporters Trust. From what you're saying, it sounds like you got the season ticket holders to stay away from the ground as well substantially. How did you manage to do that really? Because I think that's one of the big sticking points at Wednesday, that people are like, well, if people have paid for it, then they're going to keep going because they've already paid money to go and see stuff.
Yeah.
And obviously not let it, saying it's a really struggling team and we don't want to let them down, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, totally get that. As they because we'd got this 2-year deal in place as well. So some people just stuck with that and said, "Look, I'm not going to give them any more money, but they've already got this money, so I'm just going to keep going until it runs out, and then I won't buy another one." And that's an argument, and that you can't really say anything about. I had one, but I just couldn't bring myself to go in the ground, particularly after the suing of other fans started. So it was very much a case of a slow burn, and we built up to it. But it was trying to get the message across that whilst the financial part obviously was fundamental to it, but as I said earlier, it's also about being there and endorsing what they're doing. Because if you turn up, you are basically making it look like it's normal, it's okay, or no, I'm not happy with you, but I'm not unhappy enough to do anything about it. That's why ordinary protests they're important to get the message out, to get visibility, to get your voice heard. But on their own, it won't work. You have to remember that these people do not care if you are happy. They don't even care, it would appear, if the club is successful enough. As long as they can hook you in and you keep turning up on a match day, that's all they need. So it is within our power to stop that. And if a lot of people who've already paid, they're not going to not go. And I think you have to, when you're at this point and you're starting a campaign, you have to understand that you've got to get people to go with you and go at their pace. Not everybody will do so. And of course, some people will never go with it. And if that's the case, let it go, let them go. Because if you start getting a bit aggressive or pushing too hard, people start to push back and they don't like it. All you can do is make your case and then lead by example. And it worked at Blackpool. It really did work at Blackpool.
Yes, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Perfect. Did you have one, Emma, or should we skip to Holly?
Skip to Holly.
Perfect. When you're ready, Holly.
Hello. I don't know if this is working. I don't know if you can hear me. Right. Perfect. Hello. Thank you for telling your tale so far. So social media wasn't quite what it is now when Blackpool were doing their thing. And I remember when I went to Blackpool, fans were standing outside the ground asking people not to go inside. I just wondered how you found other fans supported you at the time, and how would you have wanted them to support you? We've had quite a lot of good support from other fans, but that has mainly come from social media. So I just wanted to know how you would have wanted them to support you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was probably one of those people outside because we literally had what we called our outdoor office because we were homeless, we'd nowhere to go. So we used to set our flag up outside the main entrance, but just off the club's footprint. And we were there for literally from the start of the 2015 season until we got the club back in 2019. We occupied that space on every match day, every game, in every competition. We never missed one. And it was important that we were a presence there to show that, we hadn't gone away. So what we did, because we realised this is, again, it's very, very tricky. We actually, certainly at the Trust, we never asked visiting fans not to go in because we felt that was asking too much. However, some did choose not to go in, particularly as the years went by, and as when stories got out about them suing pensioners and things like that that hit the headlines, there were people like, no, do you know what, I'm not going in. What we did do was we generated masses and masses of leaflets which explained why we were doing what we were doing, and we issued those to everybody that visited. But what we did say was, if you're going in, all right, you're going to the game, but please don't buy anything when you're in there. So there are lots and lots of pubs and shops and chip shops and stuff around the area, which of course were badly affected by the downturn in football. So said, if you can go and buy your food, go and have your pints and stuff before you go in the ground, but don't buy anything. And I have to say, a lot of fans really, really supported us with that. They also, some smuggled Oyston out flags in and things for us, and they were singing Oyston out chants. So I have to say that the support we had from other fans was outstanding. And when you are really in it, and there were some very, very dark days, that support, just that moral support, meant the world to us. It really did.
Yeah, we've had a lot of support from other fans, overwhelmingly so, from pretty much everyone we've played so far this season. Similarly, making use of the facilities around the ground rather than inside. Blackpool is a good location for that, though, I will say.
It is.
I've got one in the chat, and then we'll go to Chris with a hand up. So in the chat, Victoria asks, in 16-17, I was lucky enough to attend the playoff final versus Exeter, sitting with the Blackpool fans who told me your story at the time. They felt so conflicted attending the final with everything going on. There was definitely not of orange in the stands. Is this something you ask people not to attend? As fans, we lived those playoff final moments. How did you encourage fans not to attend something this major?
That was, again, one of the most difficult times of all. I mean, Blackpool have become known a little bit as the playoff kings. We have been to Wembley quite a few times for various reasons. And many of us had been to all of them, but we just could not bring ourselves to go to that one. There were under 5,000 Blackpool fans went to Wembley for that playoff final. I'm not going to say that the fans that were there weren't proper fans. Some of them obviously were lifelong fans, but we were very, very worried that the boycott wouldn't hold, but the boycott absolutely did hold. We did make use of the social media there. There were people in pubs across Blackpool and in the homes putting pictures up of themselves saying, we're not at Wembley, we're still in Blackpool, but hey, we're still here, but we are not a penny more means not a penny more. So I'm afraid we couldn't go. And yes, some people did go, and that was all part of the conflict. There was a bit of conflict, of course, between people who did continue to attend, but it was such a tiny amount. And even out of 5,000 people, there was no way those people went to home games. So a lot of those people were, I would say, football tourists. I would say people who don't really do football much, but it was a good opportunity to get to Wembley. And so they went in on that basis. It did us a lot of good because for the first time it was such a visual and it hit the football authorities right in the face, because I don't think they'd been paying much attention to what we were doing and to the boycott. But when you get we took something like nearly 40,000 people to Wembley prior, and then you've got under 5,000 going. What's going on? You cannot ignore those numbers. You cannot ignore what the majority of fans managed to do. It was grim having to do it, but hey, so proud that we did. So proud.
Lovely, thank you. Chris?
Oh, thank you, Bethany, and thank you, Christine, for sharing so far. I guess one really tricky element of this is like the role of community trusts, like at Blackpool, teams like Blackpool. Obviously, they play such an important role, whether it's like outreach in primary schools with young children, or I'm just really curious at how does this affect like the outreach of community trusts in terms of like their outreach and also their engagement with like supporters and fan groups. Because obviously it's quite tricky with them being like a charitable foundation of the club, isn't it? It's like it's not quite a separate entity, but it almost is. So I'm just really curious to get your thoughts on that.
Okay. Yes, we have a fantastic community trust at Blackpool Football Club. And going back to the start of when we started boycotting, the chaplain of Blackpool Football Club, he's passed away since, but he was actually a family friend, and he was on the board of trustees for that community trust. And I also knew Ash Hackett, who's still the CEO, but he was the CEO then. It was an incredibly difficult time for them. The rules, of course, of football community trusts is that somebody from the board of the football club must be on the board of the community trust. So Carl Oyston was actually on their trustees, and of course they were literally tainted by association, which was horrible for them, because yes, they were doing good work, and Blackpool Supporters Trust, we did everything we could to try to work with them to say to people, look, it's not their fault really, and you need to still engage with them. But most people didn't want to. It was so far-reaching, and as I say, the toxic association of anything to do with Oystons and Blackpool Football Club affected them very, very badly indeed. And I'm absolutely delighted that they have recovered and are probably one of the leading community trusts now in the country. They deserve it because they had to put so much work in. But there's no getting away from it. When things get really bad, and this is why it's so important that football clubs are owned by the right kind of people, because they are so important to not just football on match days, but to entire communities. You know, they are going to, I'm afraid they are collateral that gets damaged. And that was what happened at Blackpool, I'm afraid. No way around it.
Thank you. We've got one more from John, and then I'm going to use Catherine's question to segue into our next part. So John asks, what support, if any, did you get from the EFL?
Naffle is what I'm going to say. I'm trying to be polite. The football authorities were shocking. In actual fact, and I mean, I know we'll come to the independent regulator later, but that is why Blackpool, we got actually our own section to give evidence, and so much of it has been you know, the new regulations coming in, a lot of it has been based on what happened at Blackpool, because we were let down so very badly by them, by the Premier League when we were there, and by the FA. They were chocolate teapots, worse than useless. We were just met with constantly, yeah, well, it's not very good, but they're not breaking our rules. They're not breaking our rules. Nothing we can do. I can't tell you how many meetings I've sat there in front of Sean Harvey et al. And just you know, felt like punching the wall, because we just weren't getting anywhere. So that's why so much needed to change. I can't say that. It was only right at the end, I think, when the receivers came in, but they had a choice of whether to deduct points from us or not, and they decided not to. So I will say thank you to them for that. But other than that, no, it was shocking, absolutely shocking, the lack of support.
Thank you. So I'm going to use Catherine's question to kind of move into our next section. So Catherine's asking about kind of sustaining the protest. How did you keep it going over the 4 years, and how did you manage your own well-being in the roller coaster of emotions? How did you build such resilience in the face of such adversity? I think in this section we're going to talk about kind of frustration to progress, bringing people together. So if you want to maybe start with Catherine's question and then take it away.
Yeah, okay. Clearly that was, you know, it was a big deal trying to keep people going. I often liken it to, you know, when you read about the suffragettes of old, and how you always hear the big stories, don't you? You know, Emily Pankhurst or Emily Davidson throwing herself under the king's horse. But the win came because of all the individuals, the little people, if you like, who just stood up for what was right day after day and just refused to give up. And it was, for us, it was about communicating that, you know, you might not be part of the trust, you know, or in the war room, so to speak. You might not be hearing every day the different things that are going on, although we did try to communicate as much news as possible to keep people interested in what was happening. But, you know, we made it clear that just staying away, just doing your bit is the biggest thing that you can do, and hold the line. Don't be tempted to give in. Just don't, just keep going. And I think people started to feel part of this much bigger thing, something that was bigger than them. And I think, you know, when you really love your club and you can see what is happening to it and what's being done to it, and also, of course, I think the fact that our owners were like pantomime villains, and they were laughing at us. They really were laughing at us. If that doesn't get you back up, I don't know what will. And for the majority of Blackpool fans, it did get the backs up. But what we did along the way, and to say it was a long time for us, it really was. So we kind of just rolled with it and took it day by day. but we did lots of different events. So, for example, in 2015, it was 5 years since we'd been promoted to the Premier League. We arranged this fantastic black tie dinner at the Hilton in Blackpool. We got every single player that was in the squad at the time to attend. I think we had, say, we could have sold it 50 times over, but we squeezed 500 people in, and everybody came together, and we used it to raise funds for Gary Parkinson, who was an ex-player of ours who ended up having a stroke and has locked-in syndrome. So we got fans involved in stuff, but it kept that connection with each other. We were Blackpool Football Club. We are Blackpool Football Club. And that is what we kept. That was the message we kept hammering away. We might have stayed away from the games, but we never, ever stopped our support. And our identity was what gave the club its identity. We started a range of merchandise. One of our alternative merchandise, one of our committee members, a guy called Lee Morton, he deserves the credit because it was his idea, came up with an alternative football shirt. So we had a lovely tangerine, Adidas, standard tangerine with white on it, and we had the BST logo on it, and it went like hotcakes. That shirt outsold the club's own shirt, the official shirt, which was like, boom, that was brilliant. But again, it gave us an identity, it gave us a flag to rally behind. Brett Ormerod, again, one of our legend players, it was his turn for a testimonial. The club were trying to get him to actually go there. He knew he couldn't go to Bloomfield Road with the way things were. So we organised it for him. I mean, if you told me a few years ago, he's one of my heroes. If you told me I would have ended up organising his testimonial, I would not have believed you. But we did it at a local ground nearby. And again, everybody just piled in because it was like, oh, a football match, and we're all back together again. It was marvellous. It was things like that, big things, little things. We used to do food bank collections, charity events, Christmas events, anything we could think of to keep people engaged, to keep people's spirits up. But obviously the most important things were reporting back on what was actually happening, and every time we got a win, it was celebrated like you wouldn't believe, and there were a number of wins along the way. Very, very important to have that communication, to have people who can speak on your behalf. Yes, I was the main spokesperson, and I became the chair of the trust, so I did most of the talking. Good job, I can talk a lot. Other people, of course, spoke for the trust as well, but by getting that message out there, and a consistent message, and enthusing people and helping people to know that you're not on your own. Yes, you might be stuck wandering around blinking B&Q on a Saturday afternoon when you don't want to be, but it won't be forever. And when we win, we will win big, and it will be our club, and we will have saved it. So you just can't beat that. Honestly, you can't. And it worked. Again, all I can say to you is, it worked. People did it. People stuck it out, and that is a very, very long time to stick out, not going to see your own football team. But it works. It really does.
Does anyone have any questions on this little section here about kind of frustrations in protesting if you're frustrated there, or boycotting in particular? Hands up again, or pop them in the chat. Emma, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. That section in particular has resonated quite a lot, I think, probably with a lot of us here, actually. I think just off the top of my head, one of the arguments we get all the time at the moment, I think in this early stage, is that, if you're boycotting, that's money taken away from, people working at the club, not just in the offices, but in the kiosks and the bars. And, these are hardworking people who need the money. And I think that of all the arguments, that's the one that feels the hardest to sort of come back with. I wonder if you got that kind of argument a lot. How did you get over that? How did you sort of get people on side despite that?
As I say, unfortunately, that when you do something like this, there's always going to be downside. I apologize if you can hear a dog bark in the background. That's my Labrador, sorry. Shush, Rufus. And there's obviously certain members of staff who have to continue and they have to pay their wages whether fans are coming in or not. But yes, again, I can't dodge the hard questions. And yes, by people staying away, there is likely to be possible redundancies, possible lack of business, whether it be in the ground or areas around the ground. What you've got to look at, though, is, as I say, it is the bigger picture, and you've got to think, well, you know, some of your players and the staff weren't getting paid as it was, and when you were all still going. So, you know, that's not an excuse, really, is it? Because they weren't paying even when you were there. There are lots of situations, I think, where you can help. I mean, we did, again, with some of the things we were doing, we were trying to fund certain things that weren't getting any money because of the boycott and what was going on. But on the whole, what you're trying to do is look to the future and secure the club and secure those jobs, and make sure that there is a club that you can all be proud of and that will be there for generations to come. If in the short term there's going to be some damage, then I'm afraid that's just something you have to take on the chin. And that I'm not a heartless person at all, and I totally get that. So I think just by doing whatever you can as a fan base to raise funds, to support local businesses, to take, you know, if you have your meetings and you've got like a little hotel that's got little meeting rooms, use them rather than whereas in the past you would have used the club. And then I'm afraid you just got to stick it out. Sorry, no easy answers sometimes.
Thank you. Any more on this section? Chats or hands up, please. Perfect. There'll be more time at the end for more questions if they're not kind of fitted in neatly. So on that, I think we've lingered for quite a long time on dark days and struggle. Yeah. But let's have a look at the other side. So first of all, homecoming Saturday. Can you tell us about that and what it felt like to have your club back?
Okay. This is where I need to get my box of tissues, even though it was 5 years ago now. When you've stayed away so long and you've lost a lot of time, and you've also lost people along the way, because there was an awful lot of people passed away during that time. It was bittersweet. It was joyous and it was sad at the same time. But most of all, it was just the most outstanding victory. And as I think Kevin Miles at the FSA said, you know, Blackpool's fight was football's fight, as your fight is football's fight. So having come through all this difficult time, and to suddenly realise that there'd been a few false dawns, but this is it, you know, they've actually gone. Once the receivers told us that they'd got control of the bank accounts and that they'd literally gone, we had just over a week to prepare to get back into the club, and then to prepare it for what turned out to be a sellout match. Now, for 5 years or so, that club had only been used, like small sections of it. It had had no investment for many years. It was in an unbelievable state. Pigeon and seagull poo all over everything, you know, seats falling apart. The kitchens had had most of the decent equipment ripped out and they'd taken it with them. It was just in the most horrendous mess. We ended up, we had about 200 volunteers who all came forward, and we literally got stuck in and we cleaned that stadium from top to bottom. We had local companies who were just so delighted, you know, to get involved. They were providing food and cleaning material, all of this. It was one heck of an achievement getting that game on, because let's say we'd gone from like 100,000 people to 16,000 people going in, and it was like, you know, can the stadium cope with it? Hospitality was sold out, everything. So what we decided to do, we got, again, a load of merchandise. Blackpool are back. People were just buying scarves, buying flags, buying everything, as you can imagine. It was a complete sellout. Southend was who we were playing, and we decided that as we'd stayed away together for all those years, we would all go back in together. So we met up on the promenade under Blackpool Tower, and we marched back to the ground together. Sorry, get emotional every time I think about it. It was absolutely fantastic. It's one of the most amazing things I've ever been part of. Just this sea of tangerine, and even the sun came out. It was just glorious. And we got in the ground, and people going back to, literally for the first time, going back to their old seats, and it was wonderful. I mean, the actual game was pretty irrelevant, to be honest. We did manage a 2-2 draw as it happened, but that was not what it was about at all. It was about us, we'd won and we'd saved our club, and we were back and all together. Just a funny little story, because my great niece, who's a footballer herself now, we'd been wanting to take her, and then of course the boycott started, so we couldn't. So she was 9 by this time, and it was her first Blackpool game, and of course she's with her auntie Christine, but I was still the chair of the trust. I had lots of things going on. We had so much media. We had the BBC, I had ITV, and they were literally following me around with a camera before the game, seeing what was going on and how it was. And then I was stood with all my family. We were all there together as the game started. And I think Emily, bless her, she just thought, oh, is this what football's all about? And I was sort of saying, it's not usually like this, Emily. You won't be on telly every week, that's for sure. But it was it was just outstanding, and we were victorious, but it was such a reward for everything that we had done. We also paid our respects to all the Blackpool fans who had passed away during that time, because obviously most clubs will do the once a year you do that, don't you? You mentioned the fans that have died. But of course, we'd so many who'd had to stay away. And I had the privilege of putting all that information together. Everybody emailed me their stories, and I can't tell you how heartbreaking some of those stories were. People who literally knew that they got a terminal illness or whatever, but they would not go back. They would not break the boycott. That's how deep it went. My own mum, who, bless her, I know this is a women's group of supporters, but it was my mum that got me into football. Quite unusual for a lady born in 1927, but she was a massive Blackpool fan, and remained so till the end of her life. She died at the age of 91, but she did get dementia. But taking her to the football matches was so important, because she was back in her own environment. We felt like we got mum back for a couple of years, but we couldn't take her during the boycott, and we chose as a family not to do that, because we knew that is what the decision she would have made for herself. But that was tough. That was a very, very tough thing to do. And then sadly, my mum passed away in October 2018 as we got the club back in February 2019. So she just missed it, I'm afraid. So that was hard. That was very hard going back without my mum, because she was such a big part of it. But there were many families like that. But do you know what? That's life, isn't it? And sometimes these things, why is it happening to us? Why is it happening to you? But it just is. And this is the time. And, you have to seize the day to deal with it. We did. It worked. It sent a massive signal to every other football club, to every rogue owner. I used to say this in speeches, every rogue owner, you should know that fans are coming to get you, because your days are numbered. We proved what can happen when fans stand together, and that really should send a shiver up the spine of anybody with the wrong intentions. So it was, you'll have gathered from what I've said, it was magnificent, and it was worth every minute.
It even makes me emotional hearing about it. I can't wait till we kind of get that day. I think we're all kind of desperately optimistic about those kind of circumstances a bit closer to home. In that BBC piece covering Homecoming Saturday, there's a brilliant quote from you saying, if you've got someone like Owen Oyston, yet he's not breaking your rules, then it's time to get some new rules, because that's embarrassing. So thinking about some new rules coming in, we obviously have the regulator kind of on the horizon. Does that feel like the kind of change you were calling for back then? do you feel optimistic about it, that it's something that clubs like us and Morecambe, and I think about clubs like Blackburn or Swindon or Hull even, who like might be at other points on this journey, like, is that something we can be looking forward to? Is the EFL regulated kind of like a nice thing to look forward to on the horizon, basically? What are your thoughts on that?
It absolutely is, and it should give you great hope, and that's why I'm absolutely convinced that whatever is going on at your club now, one way or another, you certainly will not have to boycott if you decide to do it for as long as we did. The regulator will be spreading his net before too long, and your owner will most definitely get caught up in that. There's no doubt in my mind at all. Back in 2018, Blackpool Supporters Trust started a petition to get an independent regulator. I think we only managed to get 10,000 signatures on it, but we knew then that was what was required because of all those wilderness years when it became obvious that there was literally no help for us whatsoever. And when the structure within which your sport exists, whether it's a sport or a business or whatever, if the infrastructure is not fit for purpose, something needs to change. And as we know, football clubs are so much more than just an ordinary business. So it needs a quite extraordinary kind of framework. And we all know where football's gone, and it's gone for the money and become very plastic in many ways. But all these things that have gone on, all these bad things that have gone on, have ended up coming together to create such a protest, such a situation whereby they couldn't ignore us anymore. That's why, again, not blowing our own trumpet, but what Blackpool did was massively important because it was unique. We were the first ones to do it. In fact, we're the only ones to do it now. So if you decide to do it, then good on you, because you'll be the next in line. Nobody else has done it yet. But the regulator, it was born out of all of these troubles. So if you told me back then that we would have ended up by 2025, we would not only be talking about a regulator as a possibility, but that it would already have happened and be enshrined in law, I don't think I'd have believed you, because I remember, and I will never forget, those nothing we can do, and these feelings of, well, you're just fans, I'm sorry, you've got no say in this at all. And we have collectively changed that. Blackpool fans, Blackburn fans, Leyton Orient, Charles, everybody, and obviously yourselves now are part of that. But hopefully you will not have to wait so long. What was absolutely fantastic for me was that when the fan-led review was started by, and Tracy Crouch, of course, was the MP at the time that chaired it, they heard over 300 hours of evidence from various football clubs. I mean, that's pretty shameful if you think about it. That is a lot of evidence from across the football family. And there's to show that how much has been going wrong for how long it's been going wrong. And for us to Blackpool to be given, we literally were given our own meeting with them. And I was able to deliver all of this evidence and stuff we haven't even got round to talking about tonight, but particularly of evidence of how we were let down by all three of the football authorities. There were jaws hitting the floor, is all I can say. And I spoke a couple of years ago at an FSA conference. I was on a panel with the government's barrister who was appointed to oversee obviously all the legalities of a regulator, and he actually said to me that of all the evidence from Blackpool was so compelling, and has formed the backbone of what's coming now. That's music to my ears, because all the way through, one of the things that kept me going was that not only that we were going to get our football club back, but that we were going to change football for the better. Because I'm not the sort of person that could just go back and go, all right, we've won, we've got our club back, I'm all right, Jack, see ya. As I said, I've seen too much and I can't unsee it. So you know, it's great what's happened so far, but there's so much more needs to be done, and I'm determined to keep going until it's right for everybody. It's not going to be a magic wand by any means, but the fact is that we have now got legislation, we have got a regulator who is going to have teeth and who is going to be able to wade in if required, and if necessary, remove somebody. And actually, because you know, there's going to be a licensing system, and if they are not meeting the very strict criteria that's required, they won't get a license to be able to for the team to be able to play. So things are changing, and they're changing really in footballing terms quite rapidly. Obviously not quite rapidly enough for you guys at the moment, but it's coming, and literally the next few months we'll see some differences. I do believe that if you do start boycotting now, you won't still be doing it in 4 years' time like we were. You absolutely won't.
Fingers crossed. I think we're due a group thank you card to Christine if the regulator, straight when the regulator saves us. Do we have any questions about Homecoming Saturday or the incoming regulator before we kind of go to the pre-submitted questions? Then we'll do some more if anything's not slotted in neatly again. Hands up or chat, please. You must have been so thorough. Pop your hand up Emma.
I just wanted to say thank you, really, for the precedent that you've set. I don't know if you had like other supporters that had been through similar things at the same time that you could lean on, but the fact that we could, you know, think of Blackpool immediately as an example, speak to you about it. Obviously, we've met you through going through similar things. And yeah, just the idea of doing that without the precedent and without the support is mind-blowing to me. So yeah, I guess I just wonder if you had support from other fan groups, maybe the FSA. I don't know how involved,
yeah,
how far on they were at that time.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I got involved with the FSA, really, because we turned to them for advice, as in, you know, what can we do? There must be something we can do, until it became obvious that, you know, we were on our own on this at that time. When I say on our own in terms of authorities and people could do something, but fans were brilliant all the way through. And then within 3 weeks of us getting our club back, we were asked to go over to Port Vale. So I went with a couple of my colleagues because Port Vale were having problems, that they had this awful owner who there was somebody who wanted to buy the club, but he was refusing to sell. Ironically, the EFL some years previously had given him Carl Oyston as a mentor. No, I can't get my head around that one either. So they were on the point of boycotting. They got to the end of the tether. So we went to a bit like this to give some encouragement, and I certainly, this was before COVID, so it was in the room. You know, we weren't doing Zooms in those days, and we went to say give them moral support and to just say, look, you know, you can do it, we've done it, you can do it. And I did my speech and about, you know, we're sending a message to the rogue owners, we are coming to get you. And I'm not saying he was listening just to that, but it made a difference because they were determined that they were going to do the same. And I think within 8 weeks of that, he'd sold the club. It went through. Same thing the year after. Oldham were in dire straits. They were going to do it. We went over, sound like the flying pickets, don't we? But we went over to talk to them, same sort of thing. And again, within a relatively short time, once they realise that the fans are not messing about, and you've got the example of a club that did it. It's very, very powerful. So I would, and I've actually scribbled this down to say to you all at some point, if you are going to go for this, please use Blackpool. Not everybody is totally switched on to the Blackpool story, and it was 5 years ago now that we got the club back, but use it relentlessly, because it is an incredible story, and it was an incredible thing to happen and to do, and it's powerful. So use it wherever you can. I was looking at one of your message boards tonight, and people saying, but can we do this? Are we ever going to go and whatnot? I wanted to jump in there and go, yes, actually you can. read this. So please make use of us. We've done it for a reason, and it's the ripple effect. The ripples are going on, so it didn't just get us a regulator, and it didn't just get us our club back. It can help you get yours back as well. Definitely.
Thank you. David says in the chat, so it's just a week or so until he goes, given your record. So fingers crossed.
I wish.
We'll go to the pre-submitted questions, and then if anything's not slotted in neatly, pop your hand up after these. So thank you for submitting those, everyone, in advance. I've kind of amalgamated them a little bit because a lot of them were thematically similar. If you don't feel like we've gone into detail enough on anything, pop your hand up after. So the first one, finding a voice and making an impact. So when your protests feel like they're falling on deaf ears, as ours do, what other ways can fans make themselves heard without feeling like they're punishing the club itself? And looking back, what forms of protest work best for Blackpool fans?
I mean, we have covered some of this, to be fair, but clearly the biggest impact was, not a penny more, and not endorsing them with your presence, not being there, but being on the outside and making it clear that you were still there and that you haven't gone anywhere. But there are other things, obviously, that work. As I say, it's difficult to embarrass people who have no shame, and it's difficult to appeal to the better nature of people who don't have one. However, there's still, where you've got to hit them where it hurts. And I did see something about, for example, there was a protest, wasn't there, at the Thai embassy, which is linked to your owner. If they have business dealings and they have a reputation that they want to uphold, if you can find ways to get in there and to crash that, that can be very, very powerful. One of the earliest wins we had was that, village hotels in, I think it was 2016 season, they became the shirt sponsors, and obviously we'd started boycotting. There is a village hotel in Blackpool, still is actually, and a lot of local people were members of their golf club, were members of their swimming pool, etc., weddings, that kind of thing. And almost instantly, they felt the backlash from local people who said, right, I'm withdrawing my membership. I know of one couple who said, we're pulling our wedding, we'll go somewhere else, simply because they were sponsoring. Now, as it happened, the CEO of the village didn't really know much about the sponsoring thing. That a lot of them, they go through an agency, that does a package for them. So they might sponsor a rugby team, a team in non-league, a team in League One, whatever. And that's basically what had happened. He was mortified when he found out, and the background and why we were boycotting. So he actually came on side and said, I can't do anything about it now because it's signed in for the season. But he publicly said there's no way we'll be renewing it. And he actually helped fund certain things for us because we were raising funds, justice for fans, for the fans who were being sued. And it actually ended up as a massive a win for us, because here was this guy who was basically saying, whoa, if I'd known, no way would I get involved. How, what a kick in the teeth for them when they were already starting to scramble for money. So, if you can find different ways to get at your owner, that is a good thing to do. So without actually directly affecting the lady that's working behind the bar in the club or whatever, you're going at him from a different angle, from maybe his non-football businesses. Owen Oyston had an estate agency. It folded by the end because nobody in Blackpool would put that, or very few people would put their house up for sale with Oyston Estate Agency for obvious reasons. They became tainted by their own brand. So, there's different ways to go at it. And again, this is where your creative thinking has to come in. But what was I going to say? Very important, though, whatever you do decide to do, you have to do it the right way. And without trying to sound holier than thou, you need to, at all times, maintain the moral high ground. You need to, yes, you can be outspoken, but don't be abusive. Say people, you can't take everybody with you, so accept that and let them go if they won't go with you. Don't start, turning it into Arthur Scargill and the Miners' Strike and scabs and all of that, because that will absolutely backfire. So that's not a good, that is not a good route to go. You just, as I said earlier, you lead by example, you do what you believe is the right thing, and you will be amazed how many people will respond to that and will go with it, because you are setting that good example and showing that you're in this for the right reasons, and what you are doing, it's a hard thing to do, but you're doing it for the right reasons and in the right way. We had different supporter groups. We were all, bar one, were committed to the boycott, but people had different ways of doing things. Tangerine Nights, you might have heard of them. They were like the provisional wing, if you like. They were able to go out and do things that the Supporters Trust probably couldn't. Things like getting the game against Huddersfield in 2015 abandoned and getting people on the pitch, setting the fire alarms off, heading to the village where Carl Oyston lived in the Lancashire countryside, not doing anything violent, not doing anything wrong, but putting a lot of pressure on. So wars are fought on many different fronts, and different groups will perhaps have different ideas. But if everybody can just keep that moral high ground and don't be tempted to get angry, channel your anger, laser-like focus on what you're trying to do, and don't get abusive or violent or anything like that, because that will derail you, and you don't want that. You need that togetherness. Sorry, I've probably gone off at a tangent there. But...
No, you've done my segue for me. The next kind of group of questions were a lot about unity and fan-based division. So how difficult was it to bring different supporter groups together or individuals together around boycotting? What kind of tensions or divisions arose between fans, and how did you find navigating or healing them? There's also kind of questions about like the time frame, I guess, like how long did it take until people were on the same page? What helped that process?
Yeah, I would say that the actual official boycotting started at the start of the 2015-2016 season. There were people who were doing it before then, but that was when the trust members voted and said, right, we're going for it. And we have geographical groups, Yorkshire Seasiders and London Seasiders and all of that. There was one fan group, which was the official football club fan group. I'm not singling them out, because I know a number of people who've been there for many years, but the reason the Supporters Trust was set up was because they were seen as not being independent from the club. They weren't independent from the club. The club would only actually speak with them, and then eventually they stepped up and said, right, we're not going to speak with the club anymore because it's all gone too far. But most of their members, I think, or a lot of their members, continued to attend. That obviously, the longer it goes on as well, that does cause unrest, because when you're sacrificing a lot and you see people going in every time, that's hard. But as I say, you have to let it go. There were people who just couldn't quite bring themselves not to go to games, but they tried to do other stuff, and they did something anyway. So all we could do was let that go, and as a trust, of course, it is not our place to tell people how to support their football team. So we would never ever condemn anybody for continuing to go. As I say, I did say on a few occasions that I was disappointed that there was people still going in, because that's genuine, but I totally acknowledge that it's people's individual choice. We're a democratic country and we're democratic in football, so that's how it had to be. And I think, again, because the trust took that stance, most fans took that stance as well. There were one or two scuffles here and there, but to be honest, the worst of it was that those who continued to go were labelled as mushrooms. The old saying, kept in the dark and fed on, I'll say manure because it's being recorded, so I'll be polite. And so they were labelled mushrooms. A couple of times when there were protests directly outside the club, I think a few pullets of mushrooms were thrown. But honestly, that is about as bad as it got in terms of aggression and violence. So the things on social media, and there were individuals who said some very, very unpleasant things to other people, but officially and as part of all the things that we did, generally, most people were united. The worry was more what happens when we get back in the club. Will those who boycotted turn on the ones who continued to go? But actually, and I was very worried about that, but it didn't happen. I think we just acknowledged, do you know what? We're back. We're all Blackpool fans. We all love our club, whatever we've done, wherever we've come from. So let's just get on with it. And that's what we've done. So, again, it's very much the example you set, I think. And I think I said this to Bethany and Rachel last week, but you are basically, this is being chaired by a women's supporter group. So no offence to the gentleman on the call in any way, but when I took over as the chair, there was quite a lot of, I called it clashing of antlers, because it was mainly men who were getting, a bit testosterone driven at times when things were getting a bit grim, a bit of arguing going on between, even within the trust itself. And I think having a woman come in where it was mainly men, just kind of calms things down a little bit. I will say that I think a lot of men do find it quite hard to be as rude and aggressive towards, certainly to a lady of my age. And I think at that time it was just the right thing. It just kind of calmed everybody down, and even the Muckers group, which was an old hooligan group from the 70s, who kind of reconvened around about 2017, and if there was ever going to be any trouble, it was going to come from that angle. And yet actually I ended up getting on really well with the leaders of that group. They nicknamed me Queenie. Oh, here she is, it's Queenie. And we had a lot of banter, and these things, and keeping a sense of humour is very, very important. So, that's how we negotiated it. It wasn't perfect, but in any football club, even when you haven't got problems like you've got now, you don't all love each other before, do you? So you're not all going to love each other as you're going through this, but you can unite with a common purpose, which is your love for your club and wanting to save it and for it to be the best it can be. So that's the way to do it, I think.
Perfect. Last ones before we go to kind of the room, I guess. So lessons and reflections. Were there any aspects of your boycotts or campaigns that you would do differently in hindsight? And what are the key lessons you'd share with Wednesday fans to try and stay united? Sorry for using the word united during our own crisis.
Pretty much what I've already said in that previous question, to be honest. I mean, I look back on what we did. Obviously, there will have been mistakes along the way because we were literally learning as we went along. But on the whole, it was, heck, it worked. So I'm not going to say that I think there was anything major that I wished we hadn't done. Most of the stuff we did was really good and was well thought out. One of the best pieces of advice is that when you have got like a group that's trying to strategize, whether it be the Supporters Trust or the women's group or any other groups, or if you all are coming together, people will have different ideas, and you've got to allow people to get their points across and, toss ideas around, because we still do this now in our WhatsApp group. Somebody will come up with an idea and somebody will go, yeah, that's great. Yeah, let's do it. And somebody else go, oh, hang on a minute. No, I don't think that works. It's really healthy to have different ideas and to pass them around each other, to make sure that by the time you come up with an action, you've really, really looked at it and looked at it and looked at it again, to make sure that you're not giving anybody a chance to come at you from an angle that you haven't thought of. So, working together in that respect, maybe, we should have perhaps had a few more joint actions were rather than it being the trust did this and then the Tangerine Knights did that. We did try to work together, but we were the political arm, and then there's the Knights who were a bit more active, and then there was others who did other stuff. So it's about pulling it all together and just communicating with each other all the time, and talk, and let people know where you're at, and let people know. Perhaps in the early days we weren't perhaps communicating quite enough, but we did as we got our act together. At the end of the day, we're all volunteers, aren't we? And as we added people to our group, it became easier because there was more people to share the load. So finding the right people to speak for you, to act for you. We were absolutely blown away with people literally from all over the world who had heard about it, who had perhaps been born in Blackpool, or the granddad was a Blackpool fan, but they had some connection, but were saying, look, I'm a solicitor now, I'm an accountant, I'm this, I'm that. What can I do to help? There is fantastic help from across any fan base. I've always said, fans are a resource to be cherished, really, to be embraced, not a problem. So that's something that you definitely need to do, is to try to engage with as many fans as you can and get as many opinions as you can before you take any action. But you learn as you go along. You absolutely do.
Lovely. Let's go to the room, I guess, and anything in the chat. So if anything hasn't kind of come up yet that you've had on your mind, please put your hand up or get typing. There is one in the chat from David that we'll start with. So there are a lot of people advocating storming the pitch and stopping the games. Would you advise against that, as it loses the higher ground?
Yes, probably I would advise that, simply because you are inviting criticism, you are basically breaking rules by doing that. I'm saying that even though it did actually happen at Blackpool, and it was quite an event, and it really sort of started things off. But I do remember I'd only just started speaking for the trust at the time, and media people were literally queuing up to stick the boot in to say why you shouldn't have done that, and it was irresponsible, and it was this, that, and the other. And I was speaking for the trust, and we hadn't actually, it wasn't our thing, but obviously we knew about it. So I understand the desire for something big, for something to really grab the headlines. But I just think that particularly now, with the way regulations are and health and safety, they can get you on so many different angles from doing that. You could actually set yourself back. You need to take people with you. You need people on side, not just the fans, but the authorities, your local councillors and your community, anybody that you want to help you in the long term. You've got to keep them on side. And I'm afraid that doing something like that won't go down very well. So personally, I would advise, it's not my decision, obviously, but I would advise against it, just because I think it'll backfire on you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Emma again?
Sorry, hogging the questions. I just wondered if you had any feedback from any of the players at any point during this, either positive or negative. Obviously, it takes away the crowd for them to play for. To date, I think our players have been very sort of quiet and professional about it all, but I can see one or two of them speaking out if it kind of goes on much longer. So I just wondered if that was part of your experience.
I have spoken to many players at the time and since, and managers. They're all in very, very difficult situation, because if you are, particularly if you're still playing and you're perhaps going to play for another club or whatever, they have to be very careful what they say, because they can get into bother. I totally understand that from their perspective. Ideally, we would have loved it if no manager would have stepped forward to take over, if no player would have signed for Blackpool. That's not going to happen. But nearly every single one said how they totally understood what we were doing. They were behind what we were doing. The fact that, and I should make the point that we'd been relegated till we were back in League Two, and yet we then got promoted under Gary Bowyer as our manager when they were playing in front of virtually nobody. So all this thing about that, we know we're the 12th man. Well, with the 12th man one, we're being positive, but quite often fans are not positive, and they can get on the backs of players. And a number of players have said to me that actually they found it much easier to play. It was almost like being in a library, but it was like a training session. There wasn't that added pressure. And you know, we got promoted in a season when they were playing in front of virtually nobody. So certainly something to think about. But yes, the vast majority of them got it. Those who had played and had worked there under the Oystons had so many of their own horrendous tales to tell that they were all absolutely delighted, you know, that they were getting what they deserved. So I wouldn't worry about that too much, because I think you'll find that, you know, they absolutely get it, and the pay, the professionals, they just get on and do the job, and they will.
Lovely, thank you. Anybody else? It must have just been so thorough. Perfect. Unless there's anything else from you, Christine, we can wrap up.
Okay, well, I hope it's been useful. As I say, you know, apologies if I've gone off at tangents. It was a very, well, I mean, we're talking more than 10 years ago when it started, and an awful lot happened during that time, much more than I would be able to tell you in something like this. And trying to remember it all as well is you know, in the order that it happened, loads happened. But it was one of the toughest things I've ever had to do, but it was also one of the most inspiring and at times quite exciting as well, because I never doubted for a minute that what we were doing was the right thing. And you know, that's how it worked out. So, you know, you obviously have to all do what you think is right, but never ever be afraid to just stand up and say, we've had enough and we are going to take this one step further, because that is what will really, really count. And it will. And if there's anything we can do to help, or if you do decide to start, you know, I know from the Supporters Trust and different groups here as well, and anybody listening to this, Blackpool fans are still very much, you know, here to help if we can. I could get you somebody from the Tangerine Knights to talk about some of the things that they were doing if you're interested. They got very, very good and very, very clever. So you know, there's lots of help available and lots of support. But again, going forward, the independent regulator is happening. The cavalry is on its way, and you know, that will help you. You will not be doing this forever. You won't.
Lovely. Oh, well, thank you so much for joining us, being so open. It means a lot, and I think it's been really inspiring for everyone. There's so many lovely messages in the chat.
I'm just looking at them now.
Oh, thank you for everyone to come as well. I know these conversations aren't really easy, but they're important. And I think none of us are alone in this frustration or kind of helplessness or even the hope. This shows that change is possible even when it feels far away and we're banging against the brick wall, and that solidarity is the thing that carries you through. We'll follow up with some notes and clips from tonight. We'll keep this conversation moving. I'm probably going to take liberties and send you a form for some feedback. And if this is something you found helpful, please let us know, so we can definitely look at doing more. So yeah, thank you very much. Let's keep supporting each other and our team and finding the strength to stay, I'm going to say unified this time and not united. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
Good night, guys.
Thank you. It's been a privilege. Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.